Good afternoon, everybody. John Wallabin here. I'm a senior analyst at JMP Securities, and welcome to day 2 of our annual Life Sciences Conference. I'm pleased to have the team from Biocryst Pharmaceuticals joining us here for a fireside chat, and we got the whole team here today. So I'd like to welcome CEO John Stonehouse, CFO Anthony Doyle, Chief Medical Officer Bill Sheridan, Chief Commercial Officer Charlie Gayer, and Chief Communication Officer John Bluth. Thanks, everybody, for coming and joining us today.
Thanks for having us, John.
And I think for people dialed in, just as a piece of housekeeping, if you have any questions you'd like me to ask on your behalf, feel free to enter them via the chat, and I'll pepper them to the team as we have our discussion today. But maybe to start, John, for those who may not be as familiar with the Biocryst story, it's been a heck of a 12 months for the team. I'm hoping you could tell us a little bit about what you're working on and your overall strategy, and then we could dig into the details.
Sure. So let me start by saying we're all going to be making forward-looking statements, and those statements have risks, and our risk factors can be found on our website. But John, we're thrilled to be here with you, and you're exactly right. The company has really transformed in the last 12 months. And for those that aren't familiar with our company, the goal here is that we're building a great biotech company, one that brings oral drugs to patients who are suffering from rare diseases, and we are well on our way to building this great company. And the evidence of that is we've got our first oral drug for a rare disease launched, and the launch is going great. We have the first quarter results where we tripled Wall Street expectations and continue to see great progress on that front. And Charlie will be giving you more color on that, but we couldn't be more excited. And the reason is that it's a drug that patients really want, and they've been doing well on. And we have expectations that this drug could have global peak sales of north of $500 million. So we're really excited to have that as kind of the anchor of our company. But then beyond that, we've got a full pipeline with BCX 9930. And it's a pipeline and a molecule, Factor D inhibitor for complement-mediated rare diseases. And we're moving into pivotal trials in PNH and proof of concept in nephritis indications. And it almost instantly fills up our pipeline. And then we have an ALK2 inhibitor, 9250, that we completed phase 1. And then there's more stuff. The great news is Babu and his team in Birmingham, Alabama, continue to be efficient and effective in coming up with new discoveries. And so we'll continue to fill the pipeline. And then the last piece, and this is a big transformation for us as well, is financially we're in such a solid spot compared to previous years, with revenue coming in from ORLADEYO and a number of different options to bring additional capital. We couldn't be in a more solid financial situation. So you put all those ingredients together and you have the making of a really great biotech company.
That's a great overview, and I think we should start with ORLADEYO. That's what everyone wants to talk and learn more about. And you mentioned the early launch is going well. I was quite optimistic, and you guys did better than even I thought in the first quarter. Can you tell us kind of what's going well, what have you learned, and where can you do better in these early days?
Yeah, Charlie, I'll start, and then I'll pitch it to you. I think the big headline is it's a switch market, and Charlie and his team told you that 2 years ago at the market research. We saw it in the people that came into our clinical trial, and guess what? That's what's happening in the marketplace. And we're having a great result, and I'll pat Charlie and his team on the back. I mean, and they're doing it in COVID, getting these fantastic results. So, just imagine what we could do when we get out of COVID. And with that, Charlie, I'll pass it to you to give a little bit more color. Sure.
Thanks, John. So, yes, as John Stonehouse mentioned, it is a switch market, and we expected that, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So, in the first quarter, what we saw was more than half the patients switching from injectable prophylaxis products, and then the rest of the patients switching over from acute only, now that they have an option to treat with an oral once daily prophylaxis product. So that's going really well. And we're seeing good, consistent demand, as we expand, as we hear back from doctors. The intent to prescribe is really high. Amongst our target physicians, only the minority have had a chance to prescribe so far, but the intent across the vast majority of them is really high. And so, we think we're just getting started. As John mentioned, we were doing this in COVID, and I think one of the things is you talk about what could go better. Being able to visit our customers live is really going to make a difference. Building those deeper relationships with the doctors and the rest of the staff is important. And we haven't had a chance yet to do live patient programs, but that's getting underway now too, and that's going to be really important to just continuing the excitement from the patient side.
You mentioned the switch market, and obviously we've seen your market research, and it's very consistent with what we've done with our due diligence that people really want an oral prophylactic. Is there any other common characteristic you're seeing in patients who have switched, or is it too early or not enough patients to get kind of big trends? Is it patients who still have breakthrough attacks on the prophylactic or on a specific prophylactic injectable? Kind of any learnings there on what kind of patients are coming over?
It's a good question, John, but honestly, no. The consistent thing is they have HAE. More of the patients are coming from prophy. That's what we saw in our clinical trials as well. There's no phenotype in terms of where does ORLADEYO work really well, and there's no typical patient. It's just like it looks like the market. As far as people who are switching, they're switching from prophy in proportion to their market share. So the number one prophy switching is coming from Takhzyro. It's kind of Takhzyro, then Haegarda, then Cinryze. So, like I said, it's going well, and it's what we expected.
And you mentioned your target physicians. What is the target profile of the docs you're going after first? How many are there? And you mentioned a minority have prescribed. Have you said what percentage of them have been prescribing so far?
We haven't specified the percentage, but what I have said is that there are about 500 doctors. Mostly allergist immunologists who we know from our targeting treat 50% of the HAE patients in the US. So that's our number one focus. And that's where we're having great uptake there, but we still have plenty of runway to go. And then we're also having uptake deeper in our target list as well from doctors who might only treat 2 or 3 HAE patients, but they're starting to prescribe ORLADEYO as well.
Can you give us an update on how reimbursement coverage is going and the availability and the use of your patient access program? Because I know how important that is to the early launch. So can you give us some details and color there?
Yeah, the reimbursement process is going well. The payers are receiving ORLADEYO favorably. And I think a lot of that is because they're seeing the demand coming in from patients. So in the first quarter, the majority of reimbursement that we got was through medical exceptions, but that puts pressure on the payers. It's work for them. It costs them money in time and effort, and that brings them to the policy-making table sooner. So what we expect is by the middle of the year, the great majority of patients will have access to ORLADEYO coverage via policy through their plan or PBM. And as far as you talk about the access program, part of our strategy was making sure that we could get patients on drug really quickly. So as soon as that start form comes in, usually within a day or a couple of days, we get a quick start, a month of free therapy out to the patient so they can start experiencing ORLADEYO while we go through the access process. And we really wanted to take that burden off of patients so that they don't have to worry about, will the payer cover? They can just focus on the experience with the drug.
Any feedback so far on kind of persistence and adherence, or patients are getting on multiple months of dosing now? So what does that look like so far?
It's looking good. What we expected based on our APEX-2 clinical trial, we saw 75% of patients staying on for at least a year. So that was our target. And through 6+ months, what we're seeing is the trends are well within our expectations. So patients are staying on, they're having a good experience with the drug, and we expect that to continue.
Fantastic. And we've got some positive developments across the pond in the EU the past couple months. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you view that opportunity versus the US? Are there learnings between what's gone well in the US that you can use, or is it a completely different ballgame over there? How should we think about that opportunity and launch?
There absolutely are learnings. It's a little bit of a different playing field to continue that analogy. So in Europe, the market is mature, but it's less of a, to date, it's been less of a prophylaxis market. So US is about 60% prophylaxis. Europe is 30% or less. So the opportunity is to grow there. The feedback from patients and physicians, though, is they want prophylaxis. They're starting to get access to modern prophy therapies, and an oral once daily is really what they want. So there's a lot of enthusiasm. Same as in the US, we hired really great teams, really experienced with rare disease launches. And so our launch is underway in Germany. And then we'll expect to have further launches in the coming months and into next year in the UK and France and the rest of Europe.
And John, when you talk about a $500 million product, is that worldwide sales? I'm wondering if you've given out kind of what you think that geographic split is.
Yeah, it's global sales, and remember, it's $500 million plus. So don't forget the plus. And yeah, it's going to mostly be U.S. But the way we look at it, we're bringing this drug to every country around the world. We're going around the globe, and every country that contributes $5 or $10 million, when you add that stuff up, it really is meaningful. So we're really excited about the progress we're making moving this drug around the world.
And it is early days, and it'll probably take a couple quarters to get a sense of trends. But when do you think you might be able to provide guidance to the street, and maybe at the top line, or if not so, what metrics might be helpful, if it's start forms or prescribing docs, something along those lines? And I think I looked this morning, consensus for the year seems to be about 58 million. Would love to kind of see how you feel about that range as of today.
Yeah, we'll give guidance when we feel we have enough information that the trends are clear to us and that we can give you accurate guidance. We don't want to guide when we're still not clear on what the trends are. So after a quarter, that's pretty tough, right? I think, it's likely over the course of the year that we'll be in a position where we'll have a better sense of the trends. And when we do, we'll put out that guidance. But in the meantime, you said it, after we put out the first quarter results, the consensus doubled. And our view is that, our goal is to meet or beat that even though it doubled. And so we're real confident that we'll be able to do that.
And given how well things have gone, are you going to need additional investment to meet demand? Is the sales organization right-sized? Or if COVID lightens up and people are getting out and seeing more physicians, are you thinking there might be additional investment kind of on the sales organization?
Charlie, you can take that one.
Yeah. So no, I think that our sales organization, we did a lot of targeting work in building that team. And, I mentioned the 500 doctors that treat 50%. And so I think we've got a great team, and we've got the right size team. I think where we're constantly looking to invest more is just, what's working really well. And, are there certain programs we can do more of? So we'll, at the margins, we'll definitely, we're very data focused, analytically focused. And so we're always going to look for what can we do that's more, but there's not a massive investment of, building the team or anything that we need anytime soon.
And to your earlier intro, John, it's not just Orladeyo for you guys. 9930 is a really interesting asset. Your oral factor D inhibitor, we saw compelling data for PNH earlier. And I was hoping you could give us a rundown on why this is an exciting opportunity for you guys.
So I'll start, Bill, and then you may want to jump in as well. It's a really interesting target, number one. And, like plasma kallikrein, it's a serine protease. Factor D is a serine protease. But the difference here is that it applies to many, many different diseases. So it's like an entire pipeline in a molecule. And so one of the things that Bill and his team and others have been doing is starting to identify beyond PNH, because now we're moving into pivotal trials. What other indications can we go into? And being in that stronger financial position I talked about, we have the resources to be able to, go into other indications. And I'll let Bill talk about what's interesting to us.
Sure. Thanks. John, this is such an exciting opportunity to help patients with a whole variety of different diseases that are driven by upset or dysregulation of the alternative pathway of complement. The research from academia over the last few decades has been fantastically productive. And in one of our slides in our standard corporate deck, we've got 6 or 7 indications that have very good evidence of involvement of that pathway in driving the pathology of the disease. And that spans hematology, nephrology, rheumatology. So this is, I think, it's a really big deal in medicine. Those diseases are uncommon to rare, and by and large, they don't have any licensed effective therapies right now. Some do, but most of them don't. Some of them affect children in a big way and can lead to end-stage renal disease and the need for kidney transplants. So the medical need here is huge, and the scientific validation is extremely strong. So we look forward to having a very broad program across a whole variety of different indications for Factor D inhibitor program at Biocryst.
And when we take a look at the PNH data you presented already, we've seen data in treatment-naive patients as well as those who were inadequately controlled on C5 inhibitors. I thought it was a pretty compelling data set. And throughout the year, you mentioned that you're going to start weaning off patients from their C5 inhibitors, so they're going to be on 9930 monotherapy. Can you give us an update on where you are on that front?
Yeah, the physicians will make that decision as the principal investigators at the sites will make that decision as things progress in the year. We didn't need to wait for any of that data. The monotherapy data in PNH subjects who were not taking C5 inhibitors was so strong that the regulatory agencies agreed that we can move straight into pivotal studies in both C5 inhibitor inadequate response patients as well as C5 inhibitor naive patients. And the fact that the target is the target. It's the same target in both patient populations. And the beautiful thing about proximal complement inhibition is that its effects are predictable, and that we can deal with the opsonization that happens as a result of C5 inhibition in those people who have inadequate response. So we're not waiting for that. Everything's well advanced. We're in implementation mode and doing all of the things required to start those studies in the second half.
I'm just excited to see it. I think it would be particularly interesting. When we look down the road to ASH later this year, are we going to see some more data from the ongoing study, maybe longer follow-up, or what could be the next kind of data cut? Because obviously you're going to be kicking off your pivotal trials. It'll be a little bit of time from data from there. So yeah, what additional data might we see from 9930 between now and then?
Certainly consider it. I think that our big focus right now is implementing the pivotal studies. I think that once all of the I's are dotted and the T's crossed, we'll find an opportunity to go into the design of those studies in a lot of details. And we might also take the opportunity to do that at an academic conference as well, because there's such a lot of interest in study designs in this field.
And you've given some details, correct, as far as dosing and endpoints and patient populations. What can you tell us today about the pivotal?
Well, I think that the regulatory discussions were very productive. The primary endpoint of both studies is change from baseline in hemoglobin. Showing that there's a reduction in transfusion requirements is a key secondary endpoint. We're measuring the relevant biomarkers, but the surrogate biomarkers in this disease are not as important as correcting the anemia and relieving the transfusion burden. So they're the two most important things. The study designs are straightforward. There's a head-to-head comparison with C5 inhibitors in the patient population that has an inadequate response to C5 inhibitors. That's one of the studies. And the other study is a placebo-controlled trial in patients not taking C5 inhibitors. And again, it's a head-to-head comparison of 9930 with placebo in that case. You can expect that the duration of these studies will be similar in general to the duration of other studies in the field. And our goal is to offer BCX 9930 to every patient in those studies who wants to continue, beyond the study duration. So, that's exactly what we did in the avoralstat program and the berotralstat program. So now we have people on all around the world waiting for commercial drug in those countries, which is really good for a generation of long-term safety data as well. So we'll do the same thing in our BCX 9930 program.
How much more difficult is it to enroll and run the treatment-naive PNH study versus the inadequate responders? And what does timing look like between these two, do you think?
I think it's a really hard thing to handicap, actually. You would think, that offering a placebo-controlled study would be harder. I'm not so sure that that's true, and we don't know yet. So once we get cranking with site activations and see how the enrollment actually is going, then we'll be in a better position to, understand the overall duration of those studies for enrollment. But I'm actually quite optimistic that, we'll be able to recruit the studies. And obviously there's competition, but our objective is to become the sponsor of choice and do a really great job listening to the principal investigators at the sites and patient advocacy groups about where to go and what the need is, and generating enthusiasm.
Fair enough. And you mentioned the pipeline and a molecule. You plan on starting, I think, a couple different proof of concept studies later this year as well, in the renal indications. I don't think you're going to tell us today what those are, but maybe can you tell us how you think about these different opportunities? Sure. I'm guessing it's some balance between opportunity, competitive landscape, and maybe biology and regulatory risk. But at a high level, there's a lot of things you could go after. What makes an attractive opportunity strategy-wise?
Well, I think you nailed it. And I would add one more thing, which is the opportunity to really understand the effects of the drug in those indications in an incredibly thorough way. And selected nephritis indications is where we're going, and we'll talk more about that in the second half. But it's going to be an incredibly thorough evaluation of the biomarkers, complement biomarkers, disease biomarkers, kidney biopsies, and the like, so that we can get a really solid handle on what the next step is in each of those indications that we're looking at. So I think that's going to be very exciting.
And any update, Eric, can you give us a reminder of the current status of 9250, your ALK2 inhibitor for FOP?
Sure. John, do you want me to take that?
Yeah.
So we were very pleased with the phase 1 study results in humans. I mean, you always have to be very cautious putting a kinase inhibitor into first-in-human studies, but there, in fact, were no significant safety findings at all. And we were able to show linear and dose proportional exposure in the dose range we studied. We're now in the process of scaling up manufacture to progress that program, and continuing with longer-term toxicology studies to support evaluations in patients with FOP. The medical need there remains extreme, with no approved products. We look forward to getting to the next step.
And I'm getting a lot of inbound questions here. There was some news today that the government wants to invest more money into COVID antivirals. We haven't talked about galidesivir in quite some time. I'm wondering if you've had any interactions or any updates there.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot to update. We continue to talk to NIAID and other parts of the government around, the need for broad spectrum antivirals, and we're continuing to move forward down the Marburg animal rule path. But I think an important piece is we collected some clinical data in this COVID outbreak, and there's still a huge unmet need. I believe, that we've made great progress on the vaccine front, which is fantastic, but the world still needs more antivirals.
Yeah, I agree. And then I guess in the last couple of minutes we have, can you remind us of your current cash position and kind of where that gets you runway-wise? And then I know everyone's going to be focused on the Orladeyo numbers each quarter, but John, if you could also lay out the key catalysts for the company over the next year and a half, maybe to get us through 2022.
Anthony, you want to take the first part and then I'll wrap it up?
Yeah. So John Stonehouse talked about the strong financial position that we have. So we ended the quarter one with about $244 million in cash. That cash, and then in addition, we have access to about $75 million to draw down with the financing we did with Ethereum late last year. And then revenue coming in from Orladeyo, which is a huge deal for us. So all of that gives us cash runway into 2023.
And then in terms of the catalyst, John, the remainder of this year and into next year, it's all about the launch and the revenue, right? Each quarter, our intention is to show everyone that this is a great drug and it's got a great trajectory, and we're going to do that by showing revenue quarter by quarter. And then, as I said before, we're going to continue to look at countries around the world where we can bring this drug to market. And so filings and approvals. And then lastly, the progress on our pipeline and a molecule with 9930, getting the pivotal studies up and running, getting the proof of concept studies up and running in the nephritis indications. So there's a lot going on in this company. It's incredibly exciting.
I agree, and congrats on all the progress. The success has been unprecedented so far this year, so I'm looking forward to tracking all the progress. And I wish everybody well on the line and at the team at Biocryst. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, John.
Take care, everybody.